I guess we can. So a couple things, please shut off your cell phones or mute them or vibrate or something so you don't get embarrassed during the meeting. Speaking of that, I better do that too. Usually I do it as I walk in the building, but I did not, so. There we go. All right, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Laura's here, right?
Yeah, she went to the restroom.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll call the meeting to order, and then you can just mark her down as here. So, all right, time being 4 o'clock on Leap Day, I will call the task force to order. Roll call, please.
Healy. Here. Heine. Kettering. Loest.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Welsh.
Here.
Catholic is here. Burns.
Here.
And Hornstra.
All right, Mr. Healy, would you hit the mic button on your microphone there? Perfect. We've got enough right now, everybody can have theirs on at one time. So, okay, roll call, we do have a quorum. Item 3 would be to declare financial conflict of interest and non-financial conflicts of interest. Robert, go ahead and start.
Burns, no conflict.
Loest, none.
Nelson, none.
Catholic, none.
Welsh, none.
All right, item number 4, approval of agenda. Any additions? Entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries, agenda is approved. We also have minutes from the last meeting, which was February 22nd. Yep, this says the 8th, but it's the 22nd. Any changes to the minutes? Entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second. Oh,
Motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Oh, I got an old agenda. Yep, I'm sorry. I'm using it as a guide so I don't get lost. Sorry about that. My mistake. Item number 5, public comment. Any citizens in the audience today care to make a public comment? We do try to limit them to 3 minutes.
When you say it was with a smile, I won't abide. I'm Ed Van Gerpen from Avon. I'm a county commissioner in Bonham County. And I wasn't here at the last meeting before. I believe there was a concern, or someone asked about people who have wind towers, if they live close to them. And so I thought I'd just share my family. My sons both live southeast Avon, and my grandson lives west of Avon. But they both own land and rent land north of Avon within the footprint of the wind farm. And there's 7 wind towers next to land we farm, and only one, the owner, lives within a half mile. One of the owners lives in Wagner. One, he's got a house south of Avon and Yankton and Phoenix. And the other ones all live, a couple other farmers, but they live at least 3 miles away. And so there's quite a few farmsteads that are involved that are close to these wind towers. And it really doesn't affect us because we don't live there. But this one place has got 4 towers around it, and my sons wanted to spray insecticide, and well, they couldn't get a fixed-wing airplane, so they had to get a helicopter out of Nebraska. And so that's one negative we've had. But I share this with you that when you're going to discuss setbacks, you know, make them good enough to show respect to the people who don't have a wind tower or didn't want to sign up for it. So that's really why I want to share with you on that. Next, I was asked to share a little bit about the money schools get, and I passed a deal out to all of you. And I went and got these numbers from the auditor, and I'm going to kind of read it so I don't mess over something. But the Avon School receives $161,000. This is per year, and about $145 from the prevailing winds. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but the wind towers aren't recorded in the DOE office in the courthouse for taxation purposes. All of that, there's some type of formula that was set up by the state, and the state sends the money to the auditor, and the auditor divides it up with the county and the school. And the auditor says it's about half and half. Well, the bill, so we get $145,000 from prevailing winds. Their building permit for Bonham County was $190 million. Now, the mill levies for the general fund of the school come from the state. I've kind of got them listed below, but before that, the mill levy would be 1.13 times 190,000. That would be 1,161,000 plus. They're paying 145, but legally, if they were being treated like the rest of us, they'd be over $1 million they'd be paying. So, and that's all decided by the legislature, but it's just not right. So they get really, good treatment. I don't want to take time for too much background, but I was in the legislature in 1989 when major changes were made that with funding schools and counties and schools, counties, and cities. It puts a limit on spending and 3% of rate of inflation, whichever is less. Well, at that time, the county taxpayers were paying about 70% of the school budget, and Yankton wanted that closer to 50-50. And so in order to do that, that has to be all monitored. And they do that by this, where you see the 3 mill levies. Those numbers come from the state. And I don't know how much paperwork that must take, but that information comes to the auditor from the state to apply those mill levies for the general fund of the school. And so when they were selling this wind project in Tripp, they were optimistic their taxes would go down. Well, the auditor doesn't have a choice. She's got to use these numbers. And so that wasn't good information. I've got an extra budget from Tripp I'll give to somebody here tonight that shows the first year the wind farm tax come in, their state aid dropped about the same amount. Now with Avon, so the wind farm there in Tripp isn't doing a bit of good financially. And now with Avon, the legislature changed it, and for 5 years, Avon gets, you might say, bonus money, this 161, and then in the next 5 years, they'll take 20% of that. First year's 20%, next year 40. So that in 10 years, Avon won't have a financial advantage of having the wind farm tax because they'll deduct the state aid. The wind farm tax will be included in what they call local effort. The taxes you pay are local effort. And then after that's been taken care of, then the state picks and steps in with the state aid. So that it's really a fairness issue, this ag, or these mill levies. Like this owner occupied, the tax, that mill levy on my house is the same as anybody in Yankton if you own the house. We might pay different taxes based on valuation, but the mill levy's the same statewide. And so it's a fairness issue, I feel, and that's how they keep it at that 50-50. I think that's all I have.
All right.
Yeah, not 3 minutes yet, is it?
Well, you were actually 7, but I'll
No.
let you go. Yeah, you were 7.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you. Other folks who want to come up?
Like in the legislature, somebody else will give me that time.
I'm not that good either, but I'll do my best, thank you.
All
I'll
right,
do
go
my
ahead
best.
and state your name
Okay,
too, please.
Okay, I talked to our local fire chief. They have a practice burn scheduled. It's a house on a piece of property that I own, and they were gonna burn it Sunday, but they said the wind is too high to do it. Well, he told me there's a couple fires in western Nebraska, and one of them got started by a lawnmower. The blade hit a rock or something, threw a spark, and now they got a big fire. Consider this. What if you had a wind farm out here on a day like this and the main bearing went out and ignited already hot oil and started spewing it out in the wind at 500 feet? Maybe the wind companies need to have a very, very high liability insurance, just in case. And another thing, I mentioned renewable energy certificates as part of my presentation about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I found out they're worth way more than what I thought they were. But if you lived in California and you didn't want blackouts due to the wind not blowing, and you did not want to look at your beachfront property with a bunch of turbines, the utility companies, or if you started a utility company or a generating plant, coal plant or anything like that, you can buy renewable energy certificates from wind farms out here in the Midwest. And those people in California probably pay a whole lot of money for a renewable energy certificate, so they didn't have to see the windmills. That way, they can generate power with diesel fuel if they want to, but if they purchase the renewable energy certificates, they can call it renewable energy, and they don't have quite so much risk of blackouts. So that's another source of income for the wind farms. Also, there's a very complex multitude of entities involved with wind farms. I'm just taking some hypotheticals because I don't understand the financial structure, but let's say we created a couple of S corporations, and maybe those 2 corporations became partners, and maybe that partnership then created a bunch of LLCs, some of them maybe shell companies, to take this money all back home to whoever owns these S-corps, maybe a foreign entity. Keep in mind, S-corps don't pay Social Security taxes. That's one good thing. But S-corps and LLCs and partnerships are all flow-through entities. So any money generated flows back through all those entities to the ultimate owner. And that's going to be hard to unwind, but you need to know where the money is finally going. Is it staying here in the country, or is it going offshore? One more thing. The lady that made the presentation from the power company had a bunch of numbers, and I had a little time to decipher. It looked like the power lines coming off of a wind farm was about 1.7 million per megawatt. Add that to the 2.4 million that I come up with to build a megawatt, and you've got an investment that'll never be recovered legitimately with the generating of power. Something else is going on, and I want to know what it is. Google mafia involvement in wind energy someday. Take it for what it's worth, but just take a look. Something else is going on here, and it's not about generating power. Thank you. How'd I do?
Pretty good. About 4. Pretty good. Other folks care to come to the microphone?
I turned 61 this year, so I have notes, but my name is Lori Sletton, and my husband Rodney is sitting over there at the blue. Do you want to wave at us? We are here because we are ordinary people that live in Yankton County, and right now the Swan Lake proposed wind power project surrounds us. We live by Pearson's Corner, which is smack dab in the middle of it. Our family has been here since the 1880s, so from Center Point, my husband's family homesteaded 1 mile south, and my grandparents homesteaded 1 mile east. And from Pearson's Corner, where we live, the whole section across the ground, or the quarter across, directly across from us, was homesteaded by my great-great-grandpa Pearson. My Yankton family homesteaded across the river in Nebraska before the 1880s, and my great-grandfather, Charles Butler Gurney, DeLoss Butler Gurney, brought his family's seed company to this town at the turn of the century. Now, that bridge out there, the old one, is a picture of what local control of what's going on here. The people at that time identified a need, and it was funded by the people. My grandfather took a whole year off from his seed company to go to individual farmers, and they all contributed, but they found that need and they built that bridge. But that's not what's happening with these wind farms. They're coming from the man that came to our place. At that time it was a company from California, but I know they've been sold multiple times, the limited liability corporations. I don't know where the money ultimately goes, but it's not coming here. And we are very opposed to them. We don't want to live in the middle of a wind farm. And let me just look here. They want access to that infrastructure that's here, so they don't care about what happens to the people. I don't feel they care about us at all. They want access to that power line that's going through there. So it's a very arbitrary thing. To them, it's just a point on the map. They're not going to live next to them. I know that my neighbors, a lot of them, this has been going on, that a very good salesman, he's exceptionally good, the man I talked to, came in from another state and sold people. He basically said, you're not going to have any control over this. We have the power, we have the money, and we're putting the windmills here, and you can either get paid for them, or they'll be next door to you and you won't get paid for them. So a lot of people just signed up. Now, they're not like me. They didn't, we've been looking at wind farms for 20-some years. I didn't bring a presentation today because I didn't even know about this until a week ago. But I feel like they were kind of tricked into doing some things, and they are affecting us. They're cost prohibitive, as you mentioned. If you add up how much it costs to build them and how much it costs to run them and how much it costs to dispose of them, they're not going to they don't produce enough electricity. So there's something smelly behind that. Somebody's getting a lot of money, and it's not going to be us local people. It's not going to be for our schools and stuff. After they're done, there's this big, huge carcass. I've seen the cemeteries. They lay them side by side, but they're not biodegradable. They just have to cover them up, and that land's worthless. So it's hard to say they're green in any way. Somebody's getting money from the Green New Deal thing. It's just not right. So they use oil still, they leak oil, they give out electromagnetic fields, and I'm really sensitive to them. They make me feel really ill. I went up, I don't know, 10 or so years ago to Pipestone, and I pulled my vehicle in next to a mile, 3/4 of a mile away from one, and I can hear this terrible, incessant noise. And I wanted to find out for myself instead of just read about it and say, well, they make noise. Well, I can hear it, and it's an incessant whir. And I'm thinking about our livestock and our dogs. They hear things we don't hear. And I can't imagine. That would be a horrible sound. Now, my husband can't hear it. He's kind of deaf. He has a brain injury. But I hear it. They do blow up. I've seen lots and lots of pictures of them that blew up for whatever reason. And then last night, I am so blessed to live here. I went out, and the geese are here. thousands and thousands and thousands of geese. They land on our property. They come every year. They've been coming for several thousand years. I wasn't around then, but you know. When they hear a noise, they lift up and they move around 2-3 miles at a time, and they're everywhere. And we're smack dab on their migration pattern. And I can't imagine putting up this huge obstacle course for them. And then they're just not gonna be here because those things whip around and make noise, and they wanna put 4 of them on the half-mile section running east and west on every one of our sections. Those geese aren't gonna be able to fly around. And I like the geese, they've been here a long time. I am concerned about what happens to them. On my way to Sioux Falls this morning, I was 3 miles away, and a big eagle jumped up out of the ditch, and I mean, it takes him a while to get up. I missed him, but they're there. They're always there. They fly overhead. I don't like what it would do to them. I don't like what it would do to my dogs. I'm concerned about our livestock and our ground and our crops. The land that we farm is in Turner County, right where they want to put a bunch more of them. I know it's going to lower our property values, and I care about my next generation. My daughter has a flock of goats, and she wants to buy ground and be there. She's not going to be there if these wind farms do go in. And if they are in there, there's some really, they need to have some, I'm so glad you're meeting, and they need some strong parameters around them. I don't want them there at all. Our family will leave. I don't know where we'll go. This is where we're from, you know. I wouldn't want a wind turbine in the same section with me. I think they should be a couple miles away, at least a mile away from human beings. We don't even know what is a safe distance. We don't want the electromagnetic lines running through our ground, and that's why we didn't sign with them. And my husband's disabled. We do not have a lot of money. I would like to pay my mortgage off. I could have used some money, but we wouldn't do it because we thought it would be bad for the people and bad for the crops and bad for our neighbors. I think they should definitely be a couple miles away from humans. And then I think somebody needs to figure out what happens to our geese. And you know, Yankton County produces really incredible, clean, green energy with our hydroelectric power out here. And I think that's an incredible contribution. But as far as the wind towers, at best, I think they need to be away from people. And I know they just want our infrastructure. That power line goes across, and they just want to be a couple miles away. But they don't live here. And I hope that you guys take all that into account. And I'm sorry that this isn't like with facts and data or anything, but that's just, we just found out, and that's our gut reaction. And we've been praying about it for a long time. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Any other comments at this time? One thing I did want to mention to you folks, were you aware that the SPP is having a public meeting on Swan Lake on March 13th?
No, I am not.
Okay, so do you have access to the internet?
I
So spp.org is the Southwest Power Pool. So if you write that down, and if you go to their website and search Swan Lake, there should be a link to a public meeting that they're having via Zoom. So I don't know if they're actually having an in-person meeting or not, but maybe you can get with someone who can get you access to that. So that's March 13th, I think it's 6 p.m. is when it starts.
Unfortunately, we feel like the people that live here don't, they might let us talk, but I don't know that they care what we say. But thank you.
More information is better.
Yes, it is.
So, all right. I will close public comment. Oh, you got 2 more. Oh,
2 more, yeah.
sorry.
For sure, 2? Did we have 3? 3 more, I think.
Go ahead and state your name, please.
Yes, hi. I'm Terry Clark.
Ma'am, pull that down just a little bit.
How's that?
Thank you.
Better?
Perfect.
Okay. My name's Terry Clark. I actually live in Wakanda, so I'm not directly in the line of the project, but I'm near enough by that I do have some concerns. A lot of this has been covered by other people. I'll just make a few brief comments. First of all, this is, these wind turbines are supposed to be this green, renewable energy. And, but the fact is, they take an enormous amount of materials to make these things, and those are not renewable resources themselves that they're made from. It takes a lot of energy to make them, typically from non-renewable sources. So, as others have pointed out, in addition to that, there's an estimated 20-year lifespan on these things, and then they're kind of worthless, and they have to take them down, and that's a lot of energy to take them down. They got to take them somewhere and do something with them. And at this point, from what I understand, the two choices are to bury them or to go through a very complicated process of incinerating them. And so they are looking into other ways to deal with these things. But when you put all of that together, the non-renewable resources that it takes to build these things, install them, transport the materials, both when they're putting them up and when they're taking them down, all in all, and they don't run 100% of the time, they don't produce nearly as much energy as other things like the hydroelectric. It seems like a debacle to me, really not a green solution at all. So it sounds like a good thing, but when you look into it, it truly is not. Let's see. Someone else mentioned about the birds. I looked into it. As of 3 years ago, the estimated number of birds killed by wind turbines in the U.S. alone was over 500,000 per year, and there's been more installed since then. It's not insignificant, and we've already lost birds for many other reasons. So I have especially people that are thinking about green, they're thinking about this earth and the animals and all this stuff. You need to be clear thinking about that. I don't think, at least where the birds are concerned, it's definitely not a good option. Someone else mentioned the electromagnetic fields. As far as I know, there haven't been studies about the health effects of these things, but we know electromagnetic fields do adversely affect people and animals, so I have concerns about that. In general, for me, it's close enough by to have concerns about health, and I also think it's just a blight on the land. If there were just a few, it might be kind of interesting, but when we're talking about great numbers of these things, we're making the countryside look more like a city. It's, so I think that's something to consider. And lastly, I want to mention that there are countries, smaller countries in Europe that have either gone with the green renewables, the wind and the solar, or have gone the other way and said, no, we're not doing it. And the places that have embraced these so-called renewable energies, their power costs have skyrocketed. Not just a little increase, it's way more expensive. And that should be a concern to all of us. I mean, these power costs are already high enough, but they're likely to triple if we really embrace this artificial, I would call it, green renewable energy. It's not really that, and it's going to cost us a lot of money. So thank you for hearing my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Ward. I'm from Viborg, South Dakota, farm just south of Viborg. I'm not in the Swan Lake situation, but I'm only 4 miles away from it. 27 years ago, when the first hotshot came out to start talking about these windmill towers, I was quite impressed with that. I really was actually really in for it back then, because the information that he provided and everything else, it sounded like everything was on the positive situation. And of course, as most salesmen do, they don't bring up anything about the negative side. So anyway, since then, I've been trying to keep a little bit of idea as to what's going on, and here and there and here, different things over those years. And now I'm staunchly against it. And the reason I am, first of all, one of the things that was just mentioned, something about the cost, and that was just the financial cost. What about the biological, the geological, and every other aspect of our creation that is being jeopardized as a result of the use of these pieces of equipment? You've heard about what happens to them mechanically, what happens to them once they can't work anymore, and things of that sort. So it almost looks like we might end up with a pile of junk. And one of the things we need to really look at when one does something like this is the input versus the output. And everything needs to be brought into the situation to determine whether there is a positive output as opposed to might be a negative output simply because it doesn't balance out. Somebody mentioned something about the financial situation, and it stinks somewhere along the line, but the numbers don't seem to match up to where it is going to be some sort of viable system to begin with. So that's something to look at. But input and output, every business, any situation that goes into that wants to be able to assure that the output is more than the input. And the input is basically putting the thing up, servicing it, and then making sure that it lasts for 50 or 60 or 70 years instead of 20. And that sort of thing is not happening according to the industry and the information that you've heard this afternoon. Just for the heck of it, I just did this kind of as a memory exercise. I tried to try to determine the number of revolutions per minute that one of those blades makes. And I decided I'd use a fairly small unit, basically 200 feet in diameter. I think normally they're much larger than that. When you head out here towards Pier, I come by a big bunch of them on Interstate 90, and they're huge. But I did some arithmetic with just a 100-foot blade, which would be roughly a 200-foot diameter windmill. And I just did a little arithmetic. I used a stopwatch, and for 1 minute, I tried to think about how fast that blade is going around in a circle, because when you look at it, it doesn't look like it's going very fast. So why in the world would that thing kill birds? I mean, it might bump them, give them a little nudge, but then when you do the old arithmetic and you take, for instance, a 100-foot long blade, that means that the diameter of the windmill is about 200 feet. Well, I know the gizmos that are out there on that interstate aren't 200. They're much larger than that. But I thought I'd just build a model on that. With a radius of 100 feet, you multiply that by 2 to get diameter. When you multiply that by pi, it turns out that the number of feet that the blade's tip would traverse in a rotation is about 628.57 feet. That's the circumference of the swing all the way around. And I figured that just from what I could mentally remember of these blades, that they turn about 13 revolutions per minute. And that is slow when you really think about it. For that thing to traverse all the way around once, it's going to do that, and do it 13 times, you've got 1 minute of time. So it's a pretty slow moving blade. And they can turn that slowly. Well, let's see, what was it? Oh, I did the calculations in revolutions per hour, or revolutions per minute first. And let's see, what did I come up with? 780 revolutions in an hour, okay? There's 13 in a minute. When you multiply that by 60 and so on, you get 780 revolutions in an hour. Well, you've taken that blade's going to go around that many times in an hour, and it has to traverse 658 or 628 feet for every one of those revolutions. Well, then you can easily calculate just how fast the tip of that blade is going. It turns out 92.86 miles per hour. Now, we drive down the interstate at 80, and you have cars passing us, and they could easily be going 90 or 100 miles an hour. But can you imagine a bird trying to avoid a vehicle that at that speed? I mean, little birds have pretty good maneuverability, but that would be something considerably shorter to be able to most likely keep from being hit. But that's just a small wind turbine at 13 revolutions per minute. What if we took that small machine and doubled the speed, which would be when it's really going in a wind? Well, then you're looking at 185.72 miles per hour. Just think of that. How can that bird avoid anything like that? And they're out there flying along, not really probably even being aware of it, and yet all of a sudden they're gone. So, and I'm dealing with a fairly small unit here as opposed to the monsters that are out there on the line. But someone mentioned something about EMF, electromagnetic fields. There's a lot of concern regarding that. Even when you take a cell phone, there's a lot of gals that find a very handy spot for this is putting it in their bra, next to their breast. A whole bunch of those girls now have either been able to get through the process or died because of breast cancer. These gizmos generate an EMF field that can cause that. And it's not something that happens instantly. It takes a long time for that to happen. Just the night before last, I would listen to a scientist who's being interviewed by Epoch TV, Epoch Times, and that's a source of true news. This gentleman says, even with the AC power that is here, he can kill human cells by exposing it to an electromagnetic field of just our plain AC electric power. Depending upon how strong the signal source is from that source determines how quickly the human cells can be destroyed. It can be done over hours, over days, over months, and even in minutes. Now, the engineering groups that put together these electrical systems, they poo-poo all of this because that's not their mindset. Their mindset is figuring out a way to build something and make it work regardless of anything else. And yet, all of this research, which is epidemiological and biological, confirms that this activity does occur. And so that's another problem that really needs to be looked at. Another one. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you have outdone Ed here, and he usually is our record holder. So you're at about 8-9 minutes. So did
Okay.
you have a few points you want
Tie
to
it up?
tidy it up?
Okay, crop production. In the areas where crops are grown, the bushels per acre drops. What those numbers are, I do not know, but they were carried out by an entity that was probably definitely associated with agriculture would know that. And to talk about that solar power system, the air machines, when do we use how can we get electricity when they're not turning? And of course, the big wise idea is, well, stick in a bunch of the lithium-ion batteries and let them store up that energy. And by the way, the United States now has a fantastic source of that right over in Nevada. Largest amount that could ever possibly be anywhere else in the world, as I understand. And right away, they're licking their chops to start making lithium batteries. But just right there, input and output, it's a huge biological and natural I don't know how to say it other than just destruction, just to get that lithium out of the ground and turn it into a battery. And then what do you do with a lithium battery after it's run its course? It cannot be recycled. So there's another pile of junk besides the carcasses of the units. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Sorry I went overdue, but there were a lot of points I wanted to cover.
You're all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Was there a, ma'am, did you want to? So are we all done? Okay. Now I'll close public comment. Thank you all for coming and expressing your opinions. Appreciate that. So we had 2 late folks come. Do you have any conflicts you'd like to declare?
I have none.
I have none.
All right, so we're good to go. We've got all the microphones on. Okay.
Sorry, just one thing.
Yes, sir.
It's Chislic night at the VFW.
Okay.
FYI.
I do have a comment. At the end of our last meeting last week, it was brought up that we were spending too much time thinking about the financial aspects of this project, these kind of projects. And I just, you have to pay attention to the money. You just can't ignore it. Every level of this thing, it can be affected, county, state, schools, townships, individuals, and it isn't a whole hell of a lot of money when you figure you're gonna pay income tax on that little payment that you get for having that wind tower out there for 20, 30, 40 years. So financial, in my opinion, financially, it is an extreme important issue.
Thank you. All right, so let's get into our discussion. We don't have any speakers for today. We had left off with finalizing pretty much all of the small wind energy items. So Gary put together a red line copy, sent that out to everyone with our initial thoughts on that. So now we are going to move on to the large, which starts with section 2604 in our ordinance, and I have it on page 180. Yours might be 1 or 2 pages off, depending on which printout you made. So if you remember last time, we moved the small systems from 100 kilowatts down to 50. So large, that would imply our large units will start at 50 kilowatts. So everyone is good with that? Because otherwise you have a gap in there if you don't. So that's kind of that's where solar's at, so it would be consistent with that. Yes, sir.
You said kilowatts. What unit are you utilizing there? Is it a small generator or is it something that is large, physically large?
Well, Robert can probably give you a better idea of what 50 kilowatts would look like.
Well, for a homeowner, it's big. For a commercial, it's a spec.
It's pretty,
I was wondering if we're talking about like kilowatts, or you're talking about megawatts?
No, this is
no,
kilowatts.
kilowatts.
50 kilowatts.
This would be
Yeah,
kilowatts.
Kilowatts.
Yes, sir, not megawatts,
And
for
there is
sure.
there is a gap there, between, and we talked about the definitions kind of early on. Is this system designed for self-consumption, or is this system designed for export? And that was numbers agnostic. We put numbers on these, but in doing so, there's like a no man's land in the middle there until you're big enough to have commercial volume and you're small enough. I think, I mean, everything's a trade-off. I think it's a reasonable trade-off. We don't see hardly any of this development up here because there's no net metering in this state, like the other 46 states have. So that's a major detriment. So I really doubt we're gonna have anything over 50 kW. If we did, we might have to treat it as a special case, but I think it's a good trade-off, you know, to have it by numerical sizing.
Yeah, I think 50 kilowatts is fine because, like you said, it is a no man's land, but it's like, that's because of the laws that are above us.
Yeah.
And decisions made by the power companies. you know, if that changes in the future, then maybe we might come back and revisit this limit, but of the 50 kilowatts.
Right.
But right now, that's the reasonable line.
I think it's a keep it simple principle kind of thing. I think it works. And it does specifically, to your points, it would outlaw a 100 kW. Now, Northern Equipment makes a 100 kW turbine. Doesn't sound big, but it's big. It's got a nacelle up on top of the pole that you can go inside. It's a good, big turbine that would be, in a local application, would be big. So
It
I
doesn't
think by
outlaw
dropping
it.
that limit down to 50.
Yeah, it doesn't outlaw, it just says that that's now in this, has to apply to all these commercial standards.
Right, that's true.
Correct, correct. So 2605 essentially says anything over 50 kW can only go in an ag district and commercial district. And we're all good with that, so we're not gonna change that. So first is applicability. The requirements of these regulations shall apply to all WEX facilities, including private facilities, with a single tower height of greater than 80 feet, rated capacity no more than 100 kilowatts, and used primarily for off-site consumption of power. So this is that little clause that we got in trouble with the gentleman who wanted to put in a 120-foot tower, and we said not all of those. So how can we word this better in the future?
Well, I think we can start with striking 80 feet, because we've really clearly defined what is the residential or the lower, small systems. And having a height in this is, you know, superfluous. It doesn't really make sense.
Okay.
So-
It's already been described.
Yeah, and so I don't think it really is a thing. We would have to change the capacity more than 50 kilowatts.
So that would go, yep, so 100 to 50.
And then used primarily for off-site consumption of power. Well, that's a little hard to describe. Again,
I think that
We're gonna
defines
be-
a commercial operation,
yeah,
because you're selling it, you're not using any of it, you're selling it directly to the grid for commercial sale.
the thing here is that, again, now we have the weird situation of a 100 kilowatt system that's being used all on site.
Correct. So do you strike primarily for off-site and just leave it that this applies to anything over 50 kilowatts?
Yeah,
And we don't care about the word private or whatever, it just applies to anything over 50 kilowatts?
Yeah.
Okay, so essentially strike everything but 50. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm not missing any holes, it seems
No, that
kinda
looks-
easy.
No, that's
Okay,
good.
strike everything else. Okay.
So read that, Sherry.
So the requirements of these regulations shall apply to all WEX facilities rated capacity of more than 50 kilowatts. So that's essentially would be the only thing there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how tall they are, doesn't matter if it's public, private, off-site, on-site. So, okay, so we're good with that. So number 2 talks about federal and state requirements. And I think we pretty much had this in the small one too. I don't know if the wording's exactly the same. All WEX shall meet or exceed standards, regulations of the Federal Aviation Administration and South Dakota statutes and any other agency of federal or state with the authority to regulate them. I mean, it's kind of a blanket statement in there.
We're using the acronym for both, for less than 50 and more than 50. Should we differentiate
So we could,
SWEX and LWEX or something?
yeah, it's in the section per se, so since the section applies to it,
Okay, then
let's
that's
see.
how it's,
And when you look back at the small one, it says small wind energy conversion systems under that. So yeah, we could put in there, what is this, number 2? So this was number 1. Let me get these straight here. So number 2, clarify that it needs to be for large.
regulate WEX in this section or something,
Okay,
or modify the acronym.
yep, gotcha. So anything else on number 2?
Not really, Sherry, but Ryan, I thought that you wanted us to keep this language in the small WEX, and it looks like in Gary's draft, it's stricken out. Is that what you intended?
Well, I think we had two pieces in there that said the same thing, and so we
Oh.
struck one,
Never mind.
but we kept the other.
All right.
And so we just had a duplicate in there, so
Yep.
a little cleanup.
Yep.
Yep, number 12. Well, yeah, it was to keep one or the other,
Yep.
so. Okay, so number 3 is mitigation measures. The first is site clearance. Permittee shall disturb or clear the site only to the extent necessary to assure suitable access for construction, safe operation, and maintenance. You've got topsoil protection, we have compaction, livestock protection, fences, and let's stop there. We're gonna leave roads to last. So of those first 5, are there any items in there that need to be adjusted?
I think the first 5 are good, but I think there's also some lacking topics.
Okay.
Birds and migratory patterns, I'm not seeing as specified anywhere, and I don't believe that the presentation we saw from Mr. Hornstra included migratory patterns. When he did his environmental impact study, there was birds and insects and rodents and every other creepy crawly you could imagine, but no people and no migratory patterns.
Okay, and I don't see it anywhere else in the section.
Yeah, looking at this, it's like we have a separate section 4, like soil erosion, sediment control plans, setbacks, so forth, and maybe something like that almost needs to go into some, maybe even as another number point.
Well, it needs to be on there somewhere, otherwise it's not gonna be in their scope. They're just not gonna ignore, they're gonna ignore it.
Oh, let me shut mine off. Go ahead.
So like we did with solar, we have design requirements. And then we go into, setbacks, but then we go into agreements and studies,
Yep.
which would be your, and then we go into what you actually need when you, when you apply for your conditional use permit. So that's what and then we have decommissioning before that. So that's what I'm wondering, if we should look at these and say, okay, what are these that relate to design? You know what I mean, and getting, and then go into setbacks or whatever, and then look at, what studies need to be done, like migratory birds, other critters, whatever, geology, things like that.
Yep, 100% agree with that.
Okay.
And I think what will probably happen is we will discuss all of those and the planning commission will organize it, like we did last time. We had the task force, we talked about what we
Okay.
wanted in it, and then we took all of those and grouped them so you could easily go through just like that flow. And Lauren is correct, we had agreements and studies, and I'll touch on, we had aviation, we had endangered species and wetlands, road maintenance, power purchase, glare study. Those were all parts of the agreements and studies. We had setbacks that was separate, we had design requirements, which are performance standards, foundations, underground installation of lines, electrical connection, soil erosion, ground cover, height, fencing, lighting, noise, and signage. So many of those are in our wind ordinance, but they're not organized as nicely as the solar
Right,
is.
because I
So-
just feel like right now it's just like, all over the place.
Correct, it
So is it possible just to go through and not, okay, which ones are design? Because I feel like we go from design and then we go back to,
So-
you know what I mean?
Site clearance. So that would be design requirements, would be site clearance,
Yes,
topsoil protection. So I'm just pencil these. I'm gonna circle these as design. So A, B, compaction, livestock protection, would we consider that as a design, or is that going to be, it's not agreements and studies, so that would have to be design,
It's design,
okay? And E, fences,
Design.
design.
Yep.
Should
Okay.
I-
Yes, sir.
I just, and maybe this is somewhere else, but I think also when we're looking at those three, A through C, E through E, what about tiling? That, I've seen that in some ordinances, addressing tiling,
So-
which could
so-
be in,
That would be a study, no?
It's almost like roads.
Or both.
It's a little bit of, kind
Yeah.
of both. I'm gonna write down tiling here, and so we've got migratory patterns, birds migratory, and then tiling is missing, so those are items that are missing. Lacking.
Now, Mr. Hornstra had eagles on his survey. But I don't know that we specifically call that out.
So that'd be in there with birds. It's
That would
not
be
in
bird.
this one.
Bird study, because, you know, these guys have, they got $300 an hour lawyers with microscopes going through this. If the words aren't there, they're not gonna do it.
Circle
Well-
design.
The problem with, actually, all of 3 and maybe 4 too, is that there's no reasonable enforcement for a neighbor, for a landowner to enforce anything unless he goes to court, and he's gonna spend a hell of a lot of money in court, and they just won't do it. They won't, some of them won't do it, they won't go. And I don't know if we possibly can, put something in it, that would enforce.
Yeah. One of the things I've been researching and finding a lot of is the seismic considerations of these towers. One fact is that seismographs need to be 10 miles from any wind tower because of the noise generated through the ground of a wind tower. And it's interesting, there's lots of papers about the negative effects of wind towers on the seismograph network used to monitor earthquakes. And then there's also a lot of papers, and I've been just collecting a lot of them and slowly digesting them, but there's a lot of them talking about doing seismic mitigation around towers and large tower sites. And that involves additional construction of in-ground dampeners and stuff. And so I don't know if that's something that we might want to include, some type of seismic requirement. Because that's part of that noise issue. And I think that's been mentioned a couple times too, and that is something true, that animals that are like burrowing animals are literally chased away from these towers. And that's because of all the ground vibrations around them, which are significant within the 1 to 10 hertz range.
Could be tough on the prairie dog hunting, huh?
Yeah. Well, some farmers might like that. But it's very interesting. There's a lot of recent papers, and a lot of these papers are pretty much from about 2018 on, about the significant seismic implications of these towers.
Yeah, I think there's a concern, there's a legitimate concern from topics that were brought up, that, you know, 30 years from now, these things are gonna be like cigarettes or some other health thing that just, oh yeah, by the way, this stuff kills you now. You know, and we've got these 500,000 feet from people's houses. I'm a firm believer on different, and we talked about this last week a little bit, participants and the non-participants. The only one I've heard testify or have been ever heard really, and I share the conversion that you had initially. It looked like a great idea, and as you start to look at it, not so much. I mean, we even would crack, yeah, we'd kill some birds, just the dumb ones. No, it's a big number. It's not just a few dumb ones, it's a lot of birds, and if you're in a migratory pattern, it's catastrophic. So, yeah, I've had the same kind of conversion over the years, and I think the participant, non-participant, you wanna live next to this thing, you get paid to do it, but the only people who want these things are the ones getting paid to do it. The non-participants just get the short end of the stick. And I think that's where the 2 mile setback, not in stone, but if the participating, non-participant wants to participate, they need to negotiate with the landowner. The county should not take away that leverage that a non-participant would have by giving them a buffer. And if the Eagle gets 2 miles, I think the taxpayer should get at least that.
I believe in our CAFO ordinances, we have something in there to the, similar to that, where we have a large setback from residences. But if a builder of a CAFO can secure an agreement
No.
with a with that neighbor,
What is it?
a waiver,
Waiver.
and that might be something that you put in there. You put in a large setback, and then
Yeah.
you put in another pathway where that can be mitigated with waivers. But it would be on the responsibility of the builder to
Yeah,
go
it's
out
outside the
and
county.
secure these
Yeah,
waivers.
you get, when you get it done, I see the rubber stamp, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's a taxpayer's resident's choice to do that. Otherwise, the pattern that we have the same thing going on in Burke County, where you have like this development group. And the development group is made up of the local folks who pony up some money and they build a Met Tower, and they do a little environmental study, and they work with the zoning to get the zoning down to bare bones, and then they sell this to the developer. The one in Burke County has been beached because they ain't buying it, or they haven't gotten the zoning good enough to sell this to a developer. So they're constantly trying to beat down these rules, but then they hand it off. And those wind turbines that are west of us here have zero local ownership. They're only started locally and then sold off. And again, I don't wanna get into the finances too, but the zoning is the
Well, it's
buffer
a- it's a
between the
major-
residents and this thing.
It's a major financial issue. If I've got a section of land out there that's next to it and it's gone down $2,000 in value from 10 to 8, that's 2,000 less
No,
less the county's gonna tax.
Those
So
financials
county
are real,
taxes go down
absolutely.
too.
Absolutely. So I just think we can buy a lot and take a lot of pressure off these individual items with a bigger setback right off the bat.
Rob, your point about participating and having waivers, Ryan mentioned, if a landowner who is not the one that has the tower on their property agrees to give a waiver, that waiver should be filed and it should run with the land.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It cannot be just a verbal agreement,
no.
handshake. It has to be a written agreement that would be filed with the county, and it would have to run with the land, so that
Easement on the
subsequent
land.
owners
Yeah, easement, that's.
will
yeah.
know that if they come to purchase that
Yeah.
property.
Ma'am, could you come up, please? Sorry.
On that topic, can you please keep in mind, I pulled my plat books out yesterday when I found out that we were needed to be at this meeting, or 2 days ago, I don't remember, but I got my plat book out. On that plat book, it's a patchwork of all these different owners. But probably at this point in time, half of our owners are the children and grandchildren of people, and they've hightailed it out of here, and they have no connection. So please keep in mind, the people that live there, when I looked at it, it's like, oh, we have one page which is the owners, and the other page is the residents. And a lot of those, they live in those houses, but the people that actually own the land are somewhere else. So the person that lives in the house matters, because we have the same problem. Then I know that some of the farm ground, the people are in California. I know their great grandfather, but they probably don't, So, that, not just the people that own it, but the people that live there, which gets a little complicated. I own the government owns my property, but I own the property I live on, but a lot of people are maybe renting and stuff, but they're permanently there. So, anyway.
And perhaps the larger setback would be, to that point, not be to the property line, but to the residence. Now, the encumbrance there is if you ever wanna put something there, but that might be a way to balance that a little bit.
So,
Roads.
yes, so I'm just gonna pause here. It was suggested that we go through and look at the design things first. So A, B, C, D, and E, I circled as design. So 3, A, B, C, D, and E. If you go to 4, that's soil erosion, and that would be part of design. If you flip the page, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 would be design. And then if you flip it again, 14, 15, and 16 would be design. So how about we start and just go through the design things first and see what we're missing. We've already identified, the migratory patterns and eagles, tiling, and seismic. So those are 3. Yes, Mike?
What about another one too, which I've read about too, likewise, is the flow of water of the ground with the disturbance as far as elevations in this here, such that impacts areas, wet areas on land that probably was not before or dry.
So can we say aquifers, wetlands? Would that be, would that cover it? Cause the ones that we don't have, what I'll probably do is go out and try to beg, borrow, and steal, and see if somebody else has language.
I think that you have in the county drainage committees,
Yes, we do.
and so if you're putting a turbine someplace that was impacting a drainage right for the property owners, both there and downstream, now we're talking quite a little significant impact.
Okay, so I've got now 4 things that we need to also maybe address. And again, I'll read them. The migratory eagles, tiling, seismic, and then water, whether that's aquifers, wetlands, drainage. So some of that goes in with tiling too, so they're all on the list anyway. And we're not gonna get language for them today. We're gonna need to beg, borrow, and steal and get examples. Yes, ma'am, did you have a comment?
Just a question whether in the design you have included safety concerns, oil leaks, whatever, it's something about safety.
Risk assessment?
So the comment from the audience was any considerations of safety concerns like oil leaks, et cetera. So that would be.
Fire hazards, electrical,
so-
pieces falling off.
So I'm just gonna put safety down, and I'm gonna put fire, oil, breakage. And I think that's something we have to revisit, because we're not getting that done in 50 minutes. So why don't we go ahead and, so
Really
3.
quick, did you have 9? 9 was in your design as well?
Yes,
9,
sir.
9, okay.
Yep.
All right.
So we have 3,
I have it
A,
over
B, C, D, and E, and I don't think there's anybody here looking to take any of those off.
I am.
Okay.
You are?
Yes,
Uh-oh.
because here's the thing, because honestly, site clearance, I think you go back to what Don said, who's gonna police that? You know, I think some of that's the landowner with their contract that they have with, you know, how are we going to make sure that, like the livestock protection, the communities shall take precautions to protect livestock during all phases of the project's life. And I think some of that, I mean, we don't have any of that in our solar, you know, we don't have the topsoil, that's decommissioning. You know, I see like the site clearance, topsoil protection, that's gonna come back with your decommissioning, making sure that it comes back and it is the same way as when you found it. Because I don't know how you're gonna police it. How are you gonna police, like Don said, how do you, the clearance?
Well, we'll do that just like we do a lot of other planning and zoning. We send
know.
Gary out in the country every day.
Do you?
So under the
You know.
solar, we have soil erosion and sediment control. All construction road
Right.
work and site development work must meet it's NPDES permit requirements.
And that's what I'm saying during construction, so like when they're constructing and say we get a 5-inch rain up there, And there's, you know, they've cleared off some land, and then it's like that video that I shared with some of you, you know, and you got dirt and water running into other people's properties and stuff. Yeah, you need to have that. That part's very important. But what I'm saying is just, if you wanna, you know,
So would take the soil erosion and sediment control language?
yeah, and that's what
substitute it
I'm
here,
saying. I don't see.
Instead of just saying topsoil protection.
I mean, the permittees will implement measures to minimize compaction of all lands during all phases of the, I mean, what is that? What is that? I mean, I think that's your owner and their agreement with, you know, and like the fences, that's the owner. You know, we don't, as the county, I think our job is to protect the neighbor.
Okay,
You know, the soil erosion during construction, we're protecting the neighbor, so there's not a bunch of dirt and stuff in their, you know, in their field.
So essentially, Lauren, if I'm hearing you correctly, you'd like to axe A, B, C, D, and E.
I would, yeah.
And possibly just put in the soil erosion
Yeah,
from solar.
because again, what I'm going back to is the fact that, you know, that's between the company and the landowner. I wanna protect the neighbor, you know?
So we also, under solar, we have ground cover. To reduce soil erosion and stormwater runoff, disturbed land, including land under and around solar panels, shall be covered and maintained.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that in solar.
Right, but again,
So-
that goes back to during construction, when you're done, I mean, I gotta look at that exactly, but,
That wouldn't apply.
Okay,
I would rather be tougher in our wording, you know, when it's being constructed, to make sure that they are mitigating soil erosion, you know, to protect the neighbor next door and their land.
okay, so just the E.
Because all of these, I don't see anything in soil mitigation, or maybe I missed it. But that's what I'm saying, is just that first part, you know, all that looks more like the landowner, whereas there's nothing really about, you know, making sure that when construction is going on, that the soil that is on their property stays on their property, you know?
Okay, so thoughts on
So, that's
essentially
just my thoughts.
getting rid of those 5 and replacing it with just the soil erosion and sediment control from the solar?
The only thing that's good about having those things in there is that it has it in writing, and so then it gives people more things to think about. So if somebody was trying to figure out what's covered and what's not, it might help them to just have more ideas of, like, these are things we need to think about.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yep. Mike?
I would be in that court because we've already come up with a number that we didn't have before. And so, as has been noted here, I think the more we can detail some of that out, it helps everybody involved. Even the decision maker, do I enter into this, and do I want one, and this is what I have to consider.
Okay, Mike, the other Mike?
Yes, I think I agree with what those two said, and that is, there is an enforcement issue, but there's also the issue that when and if somebody applies for a CUP, these are issues they would have to address. And that's why it would be worthwhile having them in there, because the developer, whoever that is, would at least have to address those issues to the county in good faith and tell us how they plan to do that. Keeping in mind, landowners, I mean, I drove all through that wind development out there near Avon, and it is the rural equivalent of a ghost town. Nobody lives out there. The landowners, many of them, if you look it up on GIS or Beacon, they live in other states. And so they may or may not care whether or not their soil is compacted or their topsoil is protected. So I think at least having it in here puts the developer on notice that they have to consider that. That's my thought.
Okay, so I've got 3 who are thumbs up to keep it, and I've got one that's kinda like, I don't know if I need it. What are other thoughts on other folks?
I think I'd rather keep it.
Okay,
Would I?
Lauren, you're looking like you're gonna do
That, you know what,
minority here.
I'm a minimalist. I like to, you know,
But I
so,
do think the idea on B, to substitute the language from the solar would be better language.
For item B?
For item B.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
So we'll do that. So 3B.
And then also in the CUP, it does say that they will submit a plan, you know, for,
Okay,
And would it be a part of this process on the enforcement if the landowner comes in with evidence that this good faith commitment that they've made has been breached, that the CUP is pulled? It was granted under circumstances, A, B, do A, B, and C, and it's not, hasn't been done yet. You're taking the guy's word that he's gonna do that. If the county's then presented evidence that that did not take place, the CUP should be pulled.
there's a procedure for complaints, and then it goes through, does it go through planning first or just county commission?
Yeah, just the county.
The county commission would hear that complaint and then vote for what to do.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question. So when Lauren's talking about, like, there's no consequences, or it's, and I know it's hard if you have a company in China and you have an issue, how do you get help with that? So is it possible to put in some sort of, like, fine or penalty? Is it, like, can that be done or not? So if they don't comply, it's written right in there that,
Do we have a fine structure?
There's already, it states in most of the ordinance that it's at least a misdemeanor in most any zoning violation thing, but
In these cases,
sometimes it isn't enough to,
Gary, in these cases, a misdemeanor does nothing.
no.
It's up to
That's what I
corporate
was just getting
headquarters,
to,
they're gonna
is
say
most of the
nothing.
time, they'd be fine just paying the fine
Sure.
and move on. So, and some of that's state regulated.
could you make the
too.
fine big enough where it would be,
I think there's some state consequences we'd have to
Mhm.
look at for that.
You know, and certainly Swan Lake will be permitted by the PUC if it does come through. So you can also go to the PUC. And they have a little authority to do things too. How open they are to that, I'm
There's a
unsure.
Question,
Yes,
Couldn't they put some language in there to require them to purchase a bond? to-
Construction bond.
For insurance against the company has to carry a bond to pay for any grievances brought against them.
yes, sir, and that is currently in our ordinance, and we will probably review that next week, I'm guessing. Next Thursday, we'll meet again. That'll probably be our last big decommissioning, bonds, putting money away to take them down, et cetera. So that's coming, but it is a valid point.
I apologize for interrupting, but as a landowner, and I know my neighbors have done this, we don't have all the money in the world to be going and trying to take people to court if they violate us. So if it's in the ordinance, we feel like the county's standing behind us a little bit. You know, I didn't sign contract, but we can't take on the wind farms if they just
Right.
thumb their nose at us.
I don't think the county's gonna take them on either.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're thinking the county's gonna take them on, I don't think so.
Well, and that's why we have a state PUC for these large projects too, because the state hopefully would enforce the permit that they award. Yes, ma'am?
Just one brief comment about what to keep in and what not. I believe the more things you can specify, then if the owner of the property has an issue, at least they can come and say, here it is, this is what they agreed to. It gives the owner just a few more tools, a little more backbone, for their complaints. If they have a complaint and it's not in there, the company could just say, there's nothing, so they have to do that.
So So the comment from the audience was that the more things that we have in our ordinance that are written down and identified up front, when someone comes in to lodge a complaint or an issue, they can at least reference something in writing and say, you said you would do this. So that was, there are a lot of people who watch this from home, so I just want to make sure it's on the record. So, okay. So I think we've done A, B, C, D, and E, maybe enough. Let's go to 4. That's the soil erosion and sediment control plan. If there's anything that you think is missing,
Looks pretty good.
okay. All right, I'm seeing a lot of, okay, we're okay with that, so that, next would be lighting, and that's number 7, and sometimes, right now in here, we don't have anything that says you can't put the red blinking lights on, we don't have anything that says you have to have the aviation alert, so they don't blink at night. I don't believe the PUC has been requiring that, but I can't say that for sure. I didn't look at the last one.
I've read it somewhere. Yeah, I think.
So for the most part, it says towers shall be marked as required by the FAA. There shall be no lights on the towers other than what is required by the FAA. This restriction shall not apply to infrared heating devices used to protect the monitoring equipment.
Without a triggering kind of light system, again, that's where the bigger setback helps, because it mitigates a lot of this stuff.
Any requests to adjust? Yes, sir.
I thought, or I think we've heard maybe at least once, if not twice, the impact of not having those lights on unless the FAA requires it for certain times with planes within a certain area. So I would be coming from the standpoint that they should not be on unless there's a need for them for flight activities.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
we got 2 different wind parks, by Avon. The first one that was built, the PUC was not involved because it's under 100 megawatts. So those lights stay on all the time. Now, the one to the south, that was a lot bigger, and so those lights just come on if there's a plane coming.
Okay.
And I live, on the north side of Avon, I got a good, can see them real good. Either the system doesn't work right, or there's a lot of planes in the air, because they're on a lot of the time. So, I don't know if that's really the answer either.
So the comment from the audience was the first wind towers that went in over by Avon were below the PUC, so they blink all the time. And the next system went to the PUC, and they are supposed to have lights that shut off unless there's an airplane in the area. So that was the comment from the audience. So do we have a desire to put that as a requirement in our county, that you have to have the aviation alert system?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing head shakes.
Yeah.
Okay,
do
so
that.
this would be add the aviation sensor, I don't know, I'll figure it out. So that was 7.
It's up by water towers on all the time.
Yeah, I know from my house, I can see all kinds of blinky lights at night, down to Nebraska, and I can see all the Avon ones and stuff, so. All right, number 8 is access, tower climbing Apparatus shall be located no closer than 12 feet from the ground. Now, we have to remember, this section could apply to smaller towers that add up to 50, not just the great big ones. So I don't know. I'm assuming the great big ones have some kind of a locked door and they go inside and climb up. So could this, I don't want to just say, well, we don't need it because it doesn't apply, because it could apply. If you get something, you said there's a 100 kilowatt tower. How do you access 100
It's
kilowatt?
inside the tube.
It's inside the tube too. So, I mean, and that's my question is, does this still apply?
I think it does. I think in a sense, because you could have a tower that has a ladder on the side. You can. Some of them are you climb the lattice. Some of them you climb the big ones. Everything's inside. But I think maybe changing this just to saying any external tower climbing apparatus, if it may not apply if that's not part of the design of the tower.
Yeah, I can't think of any examples where there is external if you've got the tube, because they have the climb protection just clips right onto the rail of the steps, and they actually have assists, like a lift assist as you go up, and that would never be external. But, I mean, you could put the tower access, that the doors need to be locked and secured, that nobody can enter the tower. But, and you can keep the language for an external, I mean, I don't think it's applicable, but, yeah, you never know,
Okay.
Might be rarely applicable.
rarely. That's the one we'll get too.
Uh-huh.
All right, then number 9, excuse me, turbine spacing. So the turbines shall be spaced no closer than 3 rotor diameters, measurement of blades tip to tip. If required during final micro siting of the turbines to account for topographical conditions, up to 10% of the towers may be sited closer than this spacing. All right, there's gotta be industry rules of thumb, because you
Well,
don't want them
that's the
so
thing. It's almost
close
like
together.
We're telling them how to conduct their business a little bit on this, because if there is weight turbulence from one turbine, it will affect the second one and result in further turbulence and wear and tear on the downstream turbine. So that's in their best interest to monitor that. I don't know if 3 rotor diameters is still best practice or what. I don't know that we wanna regulate that.
So if
Except as far as the noise, because if you have them too close, then the noise becomes additive.
yeah, yep. The,
That'd be what, 900 feet?
Yeah, 3, yeah.
so if we're looking at a 500-foot tower, how big are the blades on a 500-foot tower?
500 foot tall?
Yeah, how long are, I mean, what's they're circling, what's a diameter?
250 for a blade?
250 for a blade,
Yeah,
so
'cause it's gonna come
500
from
for
the hub.
diameter?
The hub height's 500.
Yep.
You
So
have-
it's only gonna come down a portion of that, so,
So let's say 500-foot diameter.
right?
Right.
Swept area.
So this says towers have to be essentially 1,500 foot apart.
So, the one paper I do have in here did talk about some of this stuff. If you go with a 0, setting towers as close as possible, the tower turbine capacity, generation capacity drops by 70%, so you probably will never see them that close.
No.
It actually does say that, it really just comes out to be about 3 blades. That might be something of an industry standard of 3 blades distance. I don't know if this is something that we really need to require or worry too much about, because it sounds like the industry is going to do minimally this
economic
already,
reasons, yeah.
just because of design considerations.
So do we, because another thing is if you've got one turbine and if you put the other one fairly close to it versus over here, you're impacting fewer people
So
when you do that. Because the further you go apart, you are getting closer to the people who live further away. So, I mean, if you could put all 50 of them on a quarter-mile section, that'd be great. But you can't, obviously, but the smaller footprint, and I think we do have a footprint minimization which is next. So do we need the turbine spacing? I mean, are we forcing them apart and then saying minimize your footprint? I guess is my point. Does it contradict? Yes, Mike?
I guess I'd raise the question, by allowing a certain number in a geographic setting, are we going contrary to the concerns about the health and the welfare that we talked about an hour ago, and the birds, ecology, and agriculture, all of that?
Yeah, but again, I mean, if you're going to impact, all the raccoons and squirrels and stuff, I mean, if you can compact it to a smaller area versus putting it, I mean, the dens that are living here versus everywhere. I mean, and I know in Yankton County, you can't find too many sections of land that don't have houses on it. You really can't.
I think what I'm saying is that maybe we are setting it up, or could set it up such that there wouldn't be a more or greater number in a given area than X, rather by just the spacing aspect of it.
I see what you're saying, Mike. Yeah.
I would propose that it might make sense to consider doing that by the square mile, how many could be in a square mile. The person that came with the contract for us said their proposal was to put 4 wind towers straight across the sections on the half-mile line. Because they were in amongst people, so they were doing it differently than in other places. I don't know. If you get them too close together, the birds will never find any place to fly in.
So the comment from the audience was to maybe instead look at limiting the number of towers on a section of land, because the proposal that had been presented to them was 4 towers on the half-mile line of a section. So you take a big square and you put 4 here, or 4 here, something. Am I repeating that correctly? Okay.
That kind of falls into that same thing. I mean, that would be falling right into what this is, because you're talking 1,700 feet separation between towers there.
Yeah, and quarter mile is 1320.
Yeah,
So you would be essentially limiting it to 3 towers.
well, you could,
On
on
a
a mile
line.
section, you could do tower on edge, and so you'd have 3 spaces of 1,700 feet. 4 towers, 3 spaces. So,
Be careful, because we have a 500-foot setback
yep,
from the property line too.
From property lines too,
So
yep.
then
So-
you're down to 4280.
so you might be down to 3 towers.
Yeah,
then,
I see what you're saying, Ryan. I see what you're saying, because you can't count the end one.
It's
In
only
the
1,000
distance.
feet between each one.
Okay. So what are we thinking on number 9 then? We want to just go ahead and leave it in?
Maybe keep it as a minimum.
I think we can leave it in. I
Okay.
don't think it's going to be a huge limiter to any type of tower development.
Okay. Mike, did you have something else?
She was going
Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment, whether you consider why you're looking at that particular item. Are we looking at a design, you were looking at design items, and then we were getting into kind of backing up into the impacts, and that's more of an environmental thing. So maybe just clarify why you're looking at that particular requirement. And someone pointed out that the design may be just a matter of practicality, and that you address the other environmental impacts and health impacts in a separate section.
Okay, so a design section and then maybe a separate section with health concerns.
Yeah, because it may be that you actually don't care about the spacing as far as design goes, because the industry will choose what's best, but you might address any other concerns about density or whatever in a health or environmental public impact.
Okay. And I think a lot of to Robert's point, is setbacks address a lot of the health concerns. And you justify a setback because of it. That's what you've been saying, so I just didn't want to misquote you on that. So I think the gist right now is we're gonna keep 9. Everybody's okay. So number 10 is footprint minimization. The permittees shall design and construct the WECs to minimize the amount of land that is impacted by the WECs. Associated facilities in the vicinity of turbines such as electronic boxes, transformers, monitoring systems shall, to the greatest extent feasible, be mounted on the foundations used for turbine towers or inside the towers unless otherwise negotiated with the landowner. Any modifications that we need in 10?
Seems all right.
I thought it seemed pretty decent. Okay. Number 11 is electrical cables. Shall place electrical lines known as collectors and communication cables underground when located on private property. Collectors and cables shall also be placed within or immediately adjacent to the land necessary for turbine access roads unless otherwise negotiated with the affected landowner. This paragraph does not apply to feeder lines. Feeder lines is the next section. So, any big red flags there?
How are we differentiating between communications cables are coax or whatever. But I mean, is electrical lines as collectors and electrical lines as feeders?
Okay, so we do have a definition for feeder line. Feeder line shall mean any power line that carries electrical power from one or more wind turbines or individual transformers associated with individual wind turbines to the point of interconnection with the project distribution system. In the case of interconnection with the high voltage transmission systems, the point of interconnection shall be the substation serving the wind energy conversion system. So the electrical people in the room probably understood that more than I did. There is a transmission line definition as well.
So the point of the feeder, it goes to the point of interconnection, so that's what we would call the home run. And it may be one turbine, two multiples, but that's where it connects. That's the line where it would connect to the interconnection.
Okay, so given that definition, going back to 11, electrical cables, and then you might as well go ahead and I'll let you guys read feeder lines. That one's a lot longer. So 11 and 12.
So do we want to say anything about the depth of the electrical cables?
You know, on private land, I don't know, is there
There-
code?
There is code to the depth you bury cables. They should, I believe the code is 2 feet for electrical cables.
Which isn't very far.
It isn't very far. You know, you don't have to worry about frost, you don't have to deal with a lot of those things, and so you don't have to go deep. It's all about the safety issue of cables. And there is code around exactly, you know, you have the coatings and protections around the cables. So, I think this would be largely governed by standard electrical code.
Okay, I have a question. If it's only 2 feet deep and you go across a field and you're gonna use your big equipment out there, you're gonna hit it.
That would be a concern, and that's why you'd want it near a road or something like that where it's, you know where that electrical line is. But like if you have a line that's buried to your house from your transformer to your house, that might only be 2 feet deep.
That's why you always call before you dig.
Right, but so is there a different code for going across a farm field than it is for going to someone's house? Do you know what I'm saying? Because most
Yeah.
of these are out in the middle of a field. And so if you're gonna farm around them, to
So
me,
I,
they should be like 6 feet deep.
hang on, sir, we'll get to you just a second. We'll get to you. There's a collectors and cables shall also be placed within or immediately adjacent to the land necessary for turbine access roads unless otherwise negotiated with the landowner.
Yeah,
So every one of these turbines has a road to it that you can't farm. So what this is saying is those lines have to follow the
Go
road.
right on that road or by it.
Yeah,
Right by
so
it,
you
yep.
know where it's at, unless negotiated. Now, you might have someone who says, I don't care where you put it.
Or they could negotiate that exactly, like, well, let's go 8 feet deep across you know.
Correct. Oh,
the
'cause I have
field, but
drain
that's
tile.
something
You-
between the owner and the wind tower
Okay.
construction, so. But otherwise, our requirement is to generally have it next to the road at the standard depth.
I think what you were referring to, also, you do have certain equipment, like rippers, that go through fields, and you loosen up the topsoil and that, plus other, and it would be greater than 2 feet.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
So,
state electrical inspector's gonna have the final say.
Yeah.
yeah, and
There
the,
should be easements recorded for that too.
correct.
Should have
Mhm.
legals that tell you where that stuff is.
So 11, we have a warm feeling about 11 then.
Have we ever defined collector?
I don't think, I didn't see that one. And we could certainly try and,
Collectors will, by virtue of what the feeder was, the collector is a line between two towers. It's
Right.
not the line that goes to the interconnection.
And if that's the case, those would not follow the roads, because they're, if you do your GIS search in either Hutchinson or Bonham County, you'll see that the way these things are set up is that there's a road, the county road, and then there's a access road to the turbine. But there's no road between the turbines.
You could have a road between the turbines. I
You'd have
have
to.
seen them, I have seen them where they go to one turbine and then to another turbine.
Right, and
In
if,
that case, you could have two
we
collect,
should
the collectors
specify
running there.
that
but-
then, that if a collector line goes from one turbine to the other, there has to be a road, so that you have that safety factor.
Well, I think that's what you're saying here already, because the collectors
Yeah.
are supposed to be next to roads.
Yeah.
yep,
Or predefined. I don't know if you want to even maybe make a
Oh,
requirement for an
okay,
easement.
it's in there, it's in
yeah,
there, never mind.
yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's in there.
Yes, ma'am?
The gentleman that came and tried to get us to sign up, he wanted to have us sign up to be able to put a feeder line straight across our property. So those feeder lines, they're doing those under fields all over, and it would be better if they were 6 foot under. But anyway, that isn't gonna be a road.
You know, and part of that too is the landowner.
Exactly.
If I'm gonna give you
Yeah.
the easement to do it, you're putting it this deep, and if you
Yeah.
don't, then you're not coming. And so some of it is the landowner's control.
And so I think, I don't know if that's maybe something we want to add in that if it's not placed next to a road, that there is a recorded easement for that collector. If it's underground, because otherwise, yeah, it could get
Yeah, I
lost.
just wanted to share that
in terms of-
in practicality, it looks to me like they're gonna go, they're planning to go across a mile
Mhm.
where there isn't across,
Okay.
under the road and stuff too, but straight across a field or a pasture, so.
Okay. So we can certainly add that there as well, what Ryan just said about the easement, if it's not by a road. Can we move to 12?
I think there was
So-
a question.
Yes, sir. Oh,
I just, the comment I was making is that I think there ought to be a minimum distance of at least 6 feet. I mean, we've got deep tillage equipment out there that can go down 4 or 5 feet deep, necessary to break up, compaction. And so that cable's it's not because it's not gonna freeze, it's because we wanna make sure that we don't get hooked up to it someplace.
Right.
That could be disastrous, not only to the system itself, but to the guy that hooks it. Bad deal.
Yeah, that is again a part of that easement part, that's something that should be defined in the easement, how deep it needs to be. Because you could be going across pasture, which you're not really too worried about about deep tillage equipment, or you may have the ground that you have to just go deeper, if you got tile and if you got tile in the field, it's like, that's the problem too,
A lot of it has to do with the application.
Mhm.
But, I know a guy that hooked a top overhead power line with a disc. And that's how big those things can be. And it's a good thing that he didn't get killed, because he could have.
Yeah, and I think having the easement in there, that just avoids having, it being forgotten or something like that, so that, hopefully if there's a recorded easement, those details are really hammered out in an easement, that it has to be so far deep and everything.
Can be made clear to the landowner that he has the ability to say, okay, how deep that's gotta go, you know? That, because you said you were going to include that, but that be something that the landowner be informed of, that he has the authority to dictate what that depth is supposed to be, just so that he can protect himself and his people above ground.
You know, that point, and then some other things that we have discussed, that we've said, yeah, it's a landowner's responsibility, but what landowner is up to speed on all that stuff? So, as we're going through this, or the zoning board or somebody, wink wink, we couldn't have like a landowner's fact sheet, okay, with regard to commercial wind systems. And just point these things out. You know,
Yeah.
make sure you ask about this, check this, make sure you have the right to require this, you know,
Yeah,
landowner,
perhaps-
personal
perhaps the
property
right
rights,
language
fact
around-
sheet.
Perhaps that right language around that easement for anything that's not adjacent to a road is to say an easement that defines the placement and depth as required for safe operation. And
I have a piece of property that Florida Light and Power put a wind tower system right adjacent to it. There are no roads to it. We drive through other people's fields to get to it. It's pasture ground. I'm not gonna go out and check an easement on somebody else's property. If I owned it, I probably would check it, but I think it should be a certain depth.
Let me, I was gonna say, because we're less than 15 minutes before 6 o'clock. I'll look around and see if I can find any other ordinances that require depths, to see if anybody is trying to do it or how they did it, et cetera. So we can circle back to that on there, so.
I don't know if we'd be able to say, if UL code or the, whatever the code is, says 2 foot, we can't require 6.
Yep, yep. So that's the,
I do
And-
like the idea of the fact sheet though, so that it would give the general public a better idea of things they need to look into or figure out.
Nebraska did this when the first wave of wind easement shysters came through, and they made it like things to ask the guy at your door, you know, just little fact sheets like that. When a body is together, it's all fresh in their head, because a week from now, we're gonna forget this stuff. We will, you know, certainly people who've never been made aware of it will never know to ask, and then it's down the road. So those kinds of things, sometimes when you reach those salient technology points, it's a good thing to kinda get the lessons learned and
Might
put
be-
it black and white.
it might be a good thing to do after we get this ordinance passed.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah,
create
it's-
something,
Like a
some
highlight
type of
sheet or,
information
you
so
know.
that people can know exactly what the county requires
Yeah.
and what rights you have.
so number 12 is similar, but it talks about the feeder lines.
Talks about negotiated easement,
Yep,
I think it reads all right.
Sherry.
Just everything's gotta
Yeah.
be disclosed in the plan.
yes, sir.
Keep in mind, depth today may not be depth tomorrow due
Mm.
to erosion and wind and water, but
Yeah.
maybe it should be monitored, the depth monitored from time to time, especially after a large rain event. Monitor the depth.
Okay,
Good point.
so 12, I'm assuming we're okay with 12,
Looks okay.
and maybe, because we're discussing adding a depth with the easement, and maybe we could insert the word depth around that easement somewhere too. I'm just gonna write that off to the side here. Make sure the depth is recorded on the easement. Reasonable, okay. So that is, the next would be 14, 15, 16 would be the last 3, and maybe we can get those done in 10 minutes, I'm not sure. So 14 is height from ground surface, and I think, did we do 30 in private? I thought we did 30, was the low height. So this shouldn't be 25. At minimum, it should be 30. Is that
Yeah, if it's,
reasonable?
yeah, that's reasonable.
So the minimum height of blade tips measured from ground surface when a blade is in fully vertical position shall be 30 feet. Number 15, color and finish. The finish of the exterior shall be non-reflective and non-gloss, and also all towers shall be singular tubular design.
It's okay.
Any,
Sherry, can I go back to height?
yes, sir?
On number 14, 30 feet. Something that happens with propellers when they go around, I know this because I'm a retired Air Force pilot, is that there's something called tip vortices. So when the tip of a airfoil goes through the air, there's a positive side and there's a negative side. So the negative side is away from the wind. So when the wind goes past the turbine, or past the airfoil, it creates a mini tornado behind it. You'll see this if you ever see an airplane take off on a dirt strip. When they take off, there's a big tip vortices behind the airplane. I don't know if 30 feet is big enough for that, and I think probably the correct answer to that number of feet should be determined by an engineer who's familiar with these tip vortices.
So in this section, we're looking at systems 50 kilowatts and higher. So this section will apply to smaller towers and then great big towers. And I would assume none of the great big towers will ever be within 30 feet.
I hope not.
You know, when I've never seen one of those huge towers come down, I mean, there's a lot. So is this minimum really focused on something down around 50 kilowatts?
Oh, so this applies to the small ones too?
Well, it's 50 kilowatts or higher. Remember, we have defined
Oh, I
a
see.
large system as 50 kilowatts or higher. So is this really more concerned with the small ones versus the large ones?
Yeah, I don't think it's applicable because that's a clear, I mean, yeah, to a clear liability if a machine driving by got hit or something ever got hit by a revolving blade, I mean, they're in deep stuff.
You know, so one question is, does this apply to this section? And then the next one is, should we just leave 30 feet in as a safe haven?
I think it applies simply because it can be, well,
The
again, the
small ones.
smaller, you could have something like a 75 kilowatt that someone wants to put down lower or something like that. I think we should still leave it in there with that minimum 30.
With the 30?
And
Okay.
just being in,
Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so 14's okay, back to 15 is the color
That looks good.
and tubular design. I don't think I've ever seen one that
I-
wasn't white.
yeah,
Or-
and all towers should be the singular tubular design, or, I'm like, okay, again, this is a very broad spectrum of commercial that we have now. Do we
So-
need to make that requirement?
Correct, I mean, because if you get a 50 kilowatter, will it have a lattice structure? Could it? You said
Yes.
most,
I
well,
think good.
then this would make that not possible.
Yeah.
So should we take that B, 15B out,
Yeah, and I think we could just strike B out.
just the B? So 15B. Okay. And the last one is noise.
I have seen, looking at some of the European specifications, and Europeans have been living closer to each other for a much longer period of time than we ever have. And they've got a lot of turbines mixed in amongst them. What I looked at, they were leaning toward, regulations that had 2 km, but 45 dB.
So
Best
45,
practices.
45 dB at 2 kilometers?
No, that was to the
2K.
property line, but those two,
Oh.
those two elements, not related to each other. but
Okay.
The noise level at 45 instead of 60
So 45 at the property line or the
at the
residence?
property line of the closest resident. Closest property line, I guess.
Closest, so 40 dB from property line. What
had
did we,
said-
what did we do for?
I thought it was 50.
Oh, Grant County had noise 25 feet from perimeter of existing non-participating residents as 45 dB.
So that's 45 from 25 feet of the, of the
We've got like three
residence.
different noise things.
Okay,
Noise at neighboring non-participating residents when other ambient noise is not present, less than 45 dB. Noise 25 feet from perimeter of existing non-participating residences, less than 45 dB. Noise 25 foot from perimeter of participating residence, business, government, less than 50 dB. That was Grant County. Noise at this is Coddington, noise at property line of existing non-participating residents less than 50 dB. Noise, Von Holm is noise at inhabited dwelling at time of permit application, less than 45. Noise at property, this is Clay County, noise at property line less than 50. Noise beyond the lot containing the WEX as measured at the nearest habitable dwelling, less than 60.
In our small systems, we used 50 dB measured at the closest point on the closest property line from the base of the system.
Yep,
Same standard.
yep, so currently we have noise level shall not exceed 60 dB, including constructive interference effects, measured at the closest point on the closest property line from the base of the system. And so we chose 50 for the small systems.
And we chose property line because
That would ensure wherever you
Ensures.
built your house on your property, you had, at least you knew, well, it's 50 here, and so I can build my house over here, kind of thing. That's why we chose the property line.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
who monitors that?
Gary.
Yeah, you take the
Well,
would be-
and,
that
What
would, that
happens
would,
if-
yeah, it would essentially be a zoning enforcement request that then Gary would have to go out with a
decibel meter.
decibel meter and measure it.
So,
No, he's not gonna do that.
okay, but if it's too loud, how do they make it quieter? Like, once it's built?
Well, yeah,
They have to
Yeah,
slow it
true.
down? Will that make it quieter if they go slower?
not necessarily.
Yes.
What about the distance between?
I got a big pair of earmuffs.
So at 6 o'clock, did we want to start with noise next week, or do we want to make a change here?
I'd say we just make it 50 like the other one.
Yep, I agree.
50?
That way it's consistent.
Okay, so we will cross off that. We'll make that 50.
Some of us have, but how many have been out by a wind tower and actually heard it?
So I think,
I can, on my property, they stopped at kind of the fence line, putting up towers. So I'm, I don't know, 150, 200 feet from that. I can hear that a half mile away, easily. Easily.
you can, and Don's absolutely right. And what we did with the solar, especially on setbacks, is we'd have a discussion, we go talk about something else, and the next meeting, we would revisit the hot topics. And I tell you, the hot ones are gonna be the noise and the setbacks. Those are the two.
I think decommissioning will too.
Yeah.
Well, that, yes, and we haven't got there yet, Don. We're gonna dedicate the whole meeting to decommissioning.
Yeah, and the one problem with the wind towers is the noise is a lower frequency noise.
The what?
It's a lower
Lower,
frequency.
ooh, ooh.
When you have a lower frequency noise, it tends to travel much farther.
Yes, my,
So,
But it's noise.
yeah,
yeah.
So is this all noise?
What?
This is all noise.
all noise. This would be all noise,
So,
regardless of
what you
frequency.
just- Yeah, maybe we revisit that a little bit and just finish it off
Okay.
next time.
So when we, next week when we meet on March 7th, hang on a second, on March 7th, we will pick up with noise. And that'll be, that's the last thing that was on our design list, and then we'll go back and revisit the ones we skipped. Sir?
I was wondering, the definition of property line, that could be a variable also that you might want to nail down. But is that the distance from the house to the place where the property actually is? And if it's already, say, 100 feet, maybe that's not so much of a problem. But where that property line is, if that's gonna be the measuring point for the DB, material, I mean, where is that property line gonna be with the person that's living in a house?
So the question was, where is the property line? And historically, and Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, we look at the plat. So if you have a platted parcel, that's property line. So you could have a 40-acre plat, you could have a 320-acre plat, but that would be the property line.
And the closest point?
Yes,
Closest
so
point
it's,
to the
From the
base.
base to the
and
closest point?
it's defined as the base of the tower to the closest point of the property line. So that would be the circle there, so.
Otherwise, it's the road that defines it.
Yeah, pretty
You have
much.
X amount from the center line to the property line.
Okay, so, next week, 4 o'clock, same place, March 7th. I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
I have motion is second to adjourn. Hang on a second, Mike, did you want to say something? Oh, you were gonna second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carried. We are adjourned. Thanks to the audience for coming.